Hello, everyone, and welcome to an untitled marine science podcast with me as one of your hosts, Dr. Yanis Kissen of Geekoscopy Media.
And myself, Dr. Nelson Miranda of Argonaut Science. Did you say untitled?
Yes, it is untitled because we don't have a title for it yet.
Hold on, did you say no?
Are you confused?
Is it untitled or untied? Oh, untied.
Untitled. Wow, you started with the puns already. Yes, that's the whole point of this podcast, marine science puns. We should have like a pun counter in like the side, like and make a ting
yes,
sign.
Let's execute a pun counter right now. Magic.
Ting. So the point of this episode is actually to figure out a name. This is our What's in a Name episode. Because we have a few ideas. Some of them we had to pre-scrap because somebody else also had those ideas. I don't know whether it's great minds thinking alike or us just being too slow. But on that point, like, we are planning this podcast because we are trying to align with the new marine science curriculum here in South Africa for grades 10 to 12. And I mean, I skimmed over that curriculum and it's basically like my undergrad, at least like first and second year. So it's one of those things where it's going to be like a bit nostalgic, but we're also going to recap some of the things we might have forgotten and also hopefully put things in a way that's more palatable than a lecture or a classroom lesson. What are your thoughts about that, Nelson?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think grades are confusing. So what is a grade? 10? Was it 10 to 12? What would that be for the international community? That's usually schooling, and it's usually young people. But did you know that a lot of adults actually are taking this marine science curriculum because it is hosted by the Two Oceans Aquarium in Cape Town?
Yeah.
Where I am.
They designed, which is nice because you get to like walk over to those guys and be like, "Hey, what's this? This is nonsense. Oh, this is really cool."
Or this is really cool, you know?
Yeah.
I certainly have approached them and said, what can we humble, professionals in the science field do to help? So we're going to hopefully find out.
We'll find out and we'll attempt to. And yeah, we both have our fair share of doing actual marine science and publishing scientists. And yeah, it's kind of our day job to fiddle around with a lot of wet and salty things and generate some data and scientific publications out of them. So yeah, we were thinking of having kind of two parts to this where we discuss topics that are interesting, topics that we think need to be discussed in a public forum because they're either being suppressed to some degree or just not covered by mainstream media, which is understandable because you can't talk about everything in the news. But we feel that some things need to be spoken about, some things need to be taught in a different way, or just discussed in a candid conversation, which is difficult to do with the kind of negative teaching way. And I don't mean negative as in a negative, it's a negative way of teaching, but in science communication there's like different models that there are to teaching like scientific concepts, and the one that we like to deal with is the positive one where it's a discussion with everyone, whereas a negative type of science communication is just a one-way like lecture. So we're trying to combat that by having just discussions amongst your peers and see what our perceptions are versus like what's in the literature versus somebody else who has a different perspective on things.
Absolutely. And we want to incorporate, of course, the scientific method into the structure of how we do things. So you might hear a lot of observations and perceptions from our side, and then we may come up with our view of how things are, which we normally call hypotheses. And then you might hear from us later as we test these hypotheses and we find out more information and we educate ourselves. And in the process of educating ourselves, we hope that we'll also be contributing to general education.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, in a humble way. We're not science communication experts. We're just a couple of guys in the field. We're going to be chatting in a hopefully educational way. So yeah, we're going to be talking about interesting topics and also whatever interesting things that might happen in the news that we might have to tackle, whether it's something like an oil spill or some kind of legislation being passed or some kind of change to the curriculum. So
yeah,
we'll try and keep it trendy.
Anything that is trendy or sub-trending, who knows? We may create some trends, or we may incite some trends. But really something related to marine and coastal and aquatic sciences, and probably focused around Southern Africa. It's a big world, and we can't just talk about Southern Africa in a vacuum. So I think that there's a lot to connect between, African science and the science and the rest of the world. And looking at, world trends will also be a thing that we might have to consider.
We will have to. I mean, things like climate change and global change are climatic and global, and you can't just reserve them to a certain region or area. And there's always things that happen in certain regions that are they happen in the same way in other places because there are similar things going on. So yeah, it's going to be inescapable to not talk about things that are happening around the world, but it's going to be in a local context to South Africa, because that's just the place that we studied, the systems that we study, the areas that we live in.
That's right.
Yeah, so.
And I mean, you are a South African born and bred scientist. And I mean, I think your ancestry goes back many generations in South Africa.
It's 2 generations. My great-grandparents were immigrants. So I'm a 3rd generation South African.
Well, I'm a 1st generation then. Because I'm the immigrant. I'm the prequel. I'm the prequel.
Yeah, you are the prequel.
I'm the 0.0 version, because I myself am an immigrant, and I have done all of my relevant schooling and training in South Africa, and I'm married here, and I'm now incorporated into the indigenous populations on a permanent basis.
Yeah.
Which is funny because there's definitely some themes of our specialities will probably emerge. We can't escape that either. So I'm an invasion ecologist, which is funny because it's there's a parallel. Am I an alien species? Well, I am a legal alien, not like that song, Illegal Alien. I am a legal alien.
You're not an Englishman in New York.
I'm not an Englishman in New York. I'm a Portuguese man
in Cape Town.
In Cape Town, in the Cape. I'm not the first one, because the first Portuguese guys that arrived in the Cape put down a little pole and said, "Yep, this is ours now." Yep. There is that. I just
thought about something funny. It's like one of South Africa's big cultural exports is actually Nando's, which is a Portuguese thing.
Isn't that interesting? Because it's actually a South African thing. Because if you try to export Nando's to Portugal, they'll look at it and they'll say, "Excuse me, but this is not Portuguese.
Portuguese, yeah.
I mean, it looks Portuguese, and maybe it's Portuguese inspired, but there's a whole very complex mesh of Portuguese cultures, of which I am not an expert. I know, I'm definitely more South Africanized than anything else, and what should we call it? The Immigrant podcast? That doesn't sound right.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
We have a list of potential things that I will.
Because you see, we are scientists, so of course we have to call it by the most boring and monotonous and obvious name possible, because that's the way scientists name things.
So by that logic, it's just the Marine Science in South Africa podcast.
Yeah, no, it needs to be a long one. It needs to be a long name.
Even longer than that.
It needs to be a long name, and then we'll abbreviate it.
Yeah, it's the Marine Science in South Africa by an Indian and a Portuguese dude podcast.
Yeah, what's the acronym for that?
I don't even want to think about that, because that's not going to work for me at all.
But we do have luckily we did prepare some sort of list. So let's go through the list, shall we?
Yeah. My initial thinkings, because I had one brainstorming session, and then I had one just before we started. So the initial one was thinking about, okay, we're going to be discussing everything from everywhere where water is salty, right? So it's not just in the ocean, because the salt does penetrate inland. And I, by training, is mostly, as well as you, are estuarine ecologists. So a lot of our work is not out at sea or in fresh water. It's in that in-between place. So one of the words that kept coming up is high water, because that is kind of where the tide of the ocean tides kind of extend to its maximum. So that's the high water mark. So one of my favorite ones was the South African High Waters podcast, because it kind of encompasses everything up until that high water mark.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like that as well, and because there's also an element of of a trend, a big trend that goes beyond what we immediately see. So the tides are something that they wait for no one, but when you arrive at the place, you won't be immediately aware of the tide until it's too late. So there's this gradual change that sometimes may catch you by surprise, and you never know what the tide may bring, isn't it? So there's an interesting parallel with that, and what we will be covering in future.
For sure. And then sort of the more fun version of that would be high water tidings with a pun in it. Because if you don't know ye old English and old people like us, the word tidings means news.
And that's interesting because obviously this is going to be an English speaking podcast, but that's not the only language in South Africa, and it's certainly not my first language. So, we are also aware that there are challenges with languages, which are definitely an issue in the country. We may also cover that a bit.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, we did think about having, replacing South Africa with Mzansi, and with, instead of the Z-I at the end, a C, so Mzansi. Unfortunately, that is already taken. So
yes,
that had to be crossed out.
Yes, that's trademarked.
It's probably not trademarked, but we don't want to step on anyone else's copyright ID, even if they didn't trademark it.
Absolutely.
So it's one of those things where it was unfortunate, because that's really clever. And that was Nelson's idea. But in that vein, it's like, okay, there was a chance that somebody else would have thought about it and took it. Why not as well?
Yeah, it's convergent evolution, It's, the minds get better and better, ideas get better and better, technology gets better and better, and then eventually we start converging, everything starts getting to be quite good and kind of looking a little bit the same and sounding a little bit the same.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds a little sad. It sounds like our future is going to be really boring and everything's going to be the same.
There are ideas about that, but actually the more things change, the more they stay the same. That's more to do with what's happening, because if you look very carefully, you'll see that there are many differences. And I'm sure that whatever we are addressing is not going to be the same as what our colleagues doing, using the different names might be addressing. And it's always good to look at different points of view and listen to different people, because you can learn a lot from every single person.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking about looking at different perspectives, like I also had a look at what other marine science podcasts are out there, and I've started many other podcasts as well, and I've had a couple of guys who have podcasts on marine science, and one of them runs a podcast called the Marine Science Happy Hour.
Yeah.
So our version of that, Nelson said, would be Marine Shabin.
Marine Shabin, and we had a good laugh about that.
It is funny, I give you that. Whether it makes sense or whether it's something we want to be like teaching children.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, because our viewers, we need to keep it family friendly, let it be clear.
Yeah.
And our viewers will range in age probably quite a lot. So we want to maybe not be advocating for alcoholism. I think we can talk about it, but certainly we don't want to be advocating. And in fact, there's also cultural sensitivities that we must be aware of. There's religious, sensitivities as well. So we want to be quite respectful and family friendly. So I think we won't be going with the Shabin angle.
No, that one is vetoed almost immediately, but it was just a funny thing to bring up.
It was a fun thing because they will play on words, and it ticks a lot of boxes. It really does. But unfortunately,
the family one.
Family friendliness is not one of the boxes.
And of course, you also want to include something that's part of your expertise. So for me, that's fish, and the South African national fish is the galleon, which is a local word for galleon, which is a type of ship that used to come around the coast during the times of colonization in South Africa.
The ancient times of colonization, not to be confused with the current times of neo-colonization.
So I thought of galleon. So it's like Eureka, I found it. It's like galleon. The one part is also a fish.
But why is the national fish called something that has such deep colonial roots? Is there not an alternative name for it?
I mean, also when you think about South Africa's history, a lot of things have been named from colonial stuff, and I mean, we are in the process now of renaming things. It's just the people in power who are giving things names, because it kind of mattered more to them than the local people at the time. It's not like that now. So it's the galleon is named because it apparently looks like a galleon. So that's why it's named that way.
But we can't call it a scientific name, because if we use scientific names in our podcast, then we're running into all sorts of trouble. It's Latin names,
It's people. The taxonomists are gonna get upset with us.
No,
There's gonna
sure.
be confusion, more confusion in taxonomy. There already is enough.
Yeah, for sure. And also, like, it's not even something that's kind of like common knowledge. It's one of those things, like, even like you didn't know that off like the top of your head, because it's not something that you engage with. So it's I don't think it's well known enough to make sense as a title for the podcast. Like, if you come up like on your podcast feed on Anchor or Spotify and you like see galleon, like what do you even think as just like
you'll
schooler?
be confused.
Yeah. This is a podcast about boats, like from the 1500s. Like, it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
You're gonna attract a crowd of historians.
Yeah, I do have some like historian and archaeologist friends, and I would like for them to listen to the podcast, but like it shouldn't only be them though. It's a bit broader than that.
Yeah,
so.
And I think I even thought that it would be nice to have some feedback from this. This is like the pre. This is not really the pilot. It's the
no.
What do we call this?
It's the prequel, the pre-sequel. The pre-prequel.
So I thought it would be nice to send it to a few people and get their suggestions as well for names based on what they saw, and keeping in mind that it needs to kind of make sense in some way when you read it.
And then after that, I just thought about things that just like seemed like, what's the word, like mainstream, like Deep Marine South Africa, or like Sea Insiders South Africa, which is cool, but I mean, I'd like something more creative than that. I would like something more fun to say and more memorable than something that would like appear on like BuzzFeed or Wired or something like that, you know.
Right. And that's the tough thing, isn't it? Because it's such a wide topic in general, and every specialist, once you become a specialist within this wide topic of marine science, you just feel that you are a generalist still within your specialized field. And then on top of that, everything is connected. So you can't work in a vacuum. You have to sort of do interdisciplinary work anyway, in one way or another, or at least collaborate with different disciplines. So what do you even call that? It's the many-armed podcast, the octopus podcast. I don't know.
Yeah, speaking of that, when I thought about this morning, I was like, maybe we should just name it like the Argonaut Science Podcast. Like, it's two brands, but Argonaut Science kind of encapsulates a lot of it. And my brand is more to do with SciComm than marine science. This is a marine science podcast, so that's like your brand encapsulates that better. The Argonaut which is this let me see, I've got it here. This is the little creature, right? And maybe by the magic of editing you can pop it. And you can see it's when you look at it at first glance, you think, oh, it's some sort of snail because there is a shell. And, it is a mollusk, and it has many arms, but it is also an octopus. So it's an octopus with a shell, a very fragile shell. And in terms of gender, it's the female that is the largest and holds this shell. It's the most beautiful. So, sort of good for the feminist power. And it is an octopus, and if you count I always say this to people, you can count the little arms,
of the octopus, and there should be 8 because that's what octopus means. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh my god! Did we make a mistake with our branding? Oh man, rebrand everything. Everything is incorrect. Actually,
Just
no.
Fire your marketing team, like.
Fire everyone. I have to fire myself as well.
Yeah, throw away the whole marketing team.
No, there's actually the 2 extra arms that are actually holding the little shell, which is like a cap, which is very cute. And those 2 arms are also involved in maintaining this very fragile shell. And I am a malacologist, which is someone who studies mollusks. So I have to say that if you study mollusks, you do appreciate the interconnectivity of the world. Because if you think about trying to understand the world through understanding some sort of animal, mollusks are actually, you can't really beat them very easily. Because if you want to do some sort of look into the ancient world, into fossils, then guess what? You might be looking at ammonites, and you might be looking at fossilized mollusks of some sort. If you want to look into the future and predict what the climate is going to do, how the planet might change, then look no further than even the humble argonaut, because shell-making, organisms, the shell, you see, is made of calcium carbonate usually, and if you understand the structure and the chemical composition of this shell, it gives you an immediate insight into the conditions under which this shell was made, right? And then you'll be able to predict, are things changing in the short term? And then you extrapolate and you predict how things might change in the future. And you can go into the deep future by looking at the deep past, and you can understand evolution, and you can understand adaptation of such a deceivingly fragile organism, and sometimes such an invisible. Mollusks are very diverse. There are many different kinds, countless almost. And invisible sometimes, very small, and they manage, even though they have that very, very obvious vulnerability, with the soft body, some have lost the shells even, and they seem very vulnerable, but yet they manage to populate every environment conceivable on the planet. And This is why we looked into Argonaut as a brand, and the idea of this almost sinister idea, the soft body, the squishy tentacles, and having a tentacle everywhere. There's also a little bit of that, which is fun, I think. I think in media now there's a lot of trying to understand the villainy, isn't it?
The Cthulhu aspect.
There's definitely the Cthulhu aspect. I mean, it has inspired, our, expanding our minds into the unknown, and sometimes a whole horror genre comes out of that. And there's also, I'm also thinking of Spectre, from the James Bond, world. Yeah. That's also an octopus, and they seem to be everywhere. The Marvel universe has to be mentioned as well, because, there's Hydra. But I don't think we're going to be quite so evil and insidious and calling ourselves,
No, we shouldn't.
Something like Hydra.
We should stop there. But I mean, like when you think of the word Hydra, you think more of a cnidarian than you do a mollusk.
Yes, which is quite different from a mollusk. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Although it could be the similar in body plan. It's a very different type of animal. But I'm also a big fan of mollusks. I have a little abalone shell here that I like to keep with me. And I'm a huge fan of cephalopods. I think I always wanted to be an animal behavior specialist, an ethologist. Never quite got the opportunity to do that. I do some like behavioral stuff with fish, but like for me, cephalopod behavior is like the height of marine animal behavior. Like that, and probably like that, like probably on par with like whales. It's just they have such interesting like neural pathways and behaviors, and it does seem very alien, but that's just because they have evolved so uniquely compared to a lot of other things.
That's it. And I mean, if you look at an octopus, the more we study them, the more we think, oh, this is certainly an alien, but it's not actually. At least not in the alien invasion context either. Let's not go there. But, it's just foreign to us. We're learning a lot about the study of the brain and the neurons. And certainly, mollusks are models for our understanding of everything, including behavior. If you want to delve into behavioral studies, mollusks, gastropods, which are snails, that's definitely a way to go. You can start very early doing, getting involved in experiments that really cement what we know about behavioral science. They are very good organisms to work with, and this is why a lot of good science, a lot of hard work, and a lot of expansion of our understanding of how the world works is based on mollusks, the humble snail.
The humble snail. Yeah, I think that's enough for our mollusk fanboy corner. So other things that potentially like encompass like South African lore things would be like a Three Oceans podcast, because South Africa does have its foot and exclusive economic zones in three oceans, which is really cool. Although I'm not clued up on the Southern Ocean, so that's a point of non-expertise for me. But it does encompass, I think, South African marine science a bit. Other than that, if you want to go like super academic, Aquatica Africana, it sounds like a journal.
Yeah, it does sound like a journal.
Which is, I think, too much. It's too highbrow. So I left kind of like the best for last. I just thought of this one just before the podcast, and it's like super simple, really, I think, memorable, really funny to say, and should encompass everything we talk about. Just wet and salty science.
Wet and salty science. I was expecting this actually, because here it is. We're scientists, so what are we going to call something about the ocean? We're going to say wet, we're going to say salty, and we're going to say science. There you go. What can you do?
Yeah.
It's simple.
It is simple. So I thought of it like 5 minutes before the podcast started, and I was like, let's just like break it down to what it's going to be about. And it's going to be about those three things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's where I am right now with salty science. Where are you at, Nelson?
Yeah, I quite like the high water tidings.
That's also pretty good, yeah.
Those are pretty good, but it is a little bit of a tongue twister, isn't it? High water tidings, and it's whereas your suggestion is quite straightforward and I think fairly catchy. I wonder if we don't think maybe we should include an area like maybe South Africa somewhere in the name, so that it also is catchy, so that you have a context. Because isn't it that a good journalist always says all the W's and the H's, isn't it?
W's and the H's.
Yes,
How, when, where's, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, if you can incorporate as much of that into the name, whilst keeping it fairly short and fun, I think we will have a winner.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's already a few words though, so incorporating South African is going to be difficult. Unless we just put like an SA at the end, which most brands do.
Yeah.
Or we just go wet and salty South African science.
Yeah, I think maybe SA is the way to go because I kind of like the 3 words, and then SA is sort of like, I wonder, should we say SA or ZA? I don't know if.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a very good point because it is ZA. SA is South America.
Yeah.
I mean, RSA also means South Africa specifically, but ZA works. And then, if we do build the brand enough, we're going to, get a website, and it's going to be a .co.za website. So
then we can keep
science.
It. Yeah. Wet and salty science. We've solved it.
We've solved it. That's the type of science that we do. Yeah, for sure. I mean, high water tidings also is a good one, but I think it's just a little too highbrow. Like, it's just a bit.
Yes, it's hard to remember sometimes. Wet and also translatable. Like, you can translate, wet and salty science into any language, and it will work. So that's something to consider, and we could even sort of I'm visualizing the brand and changing those words and letting them sort of vary, across the languages until they land on the wet, salty science, and if we cycle them through the many South African languages, then that'd be quite an interesting, visual as the introduction to the podcast, because we do want to put it on YouTube, isn't it?
Yes. So we will be recording video like we are doing right now. You might be seeing the video of this. So it's going to be on podcast platforms like Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, and stuff like that. But it will also be on YouTube. And we are planning on creating little blurbs and lessons that we want to add visual media to, since it's a visual platform as well. So a lot of grand plans in the future. And I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. And we've already been getting a nice workflow, meeting every week, and it's been extremely enjoyable to work with you. I'm really looking forward.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. There's going to be a good rapport because Nelson and I are good friends. We've known each other for a long time, so
that's true.
It's, we got that mark ticked off. Now we're going to figure out the technicalities and actually getting our work in and recording and planning everything out.
And I'm also looking forward to relevant topics, but also a little bit of fun, because we can cover news, what's the latest. And we can cover some, topics of interest that are related to the latest news. We certainly want to talk about careers in science and what is happening and how things are developing. But we also want to get a little bit geeky, if I may.
Yeah, for sure.
And, and maybe discuss a few interesting scientific papers or scientific literature from a different perspective, perhaps. Because we might mix, sort of geek culture and science
Oh, you're looking around already for you got so many things to draw. Yeah, you got so many things to draw from, and I think that will be a lot of fun to do.
Can't pick out something right now, but I'm sure I have quite a bit of stuff.
And then of course we also want to bring in guests and at some stage, and we're talking about scientists, we're talking about citizen scientists, we're talking about just people that are in the marine environment, in the coastal environment, people who are getting wet and salty.
Salty in multiple ways.
Yeah, probably in multiple ways. And but I think we're going to retain a little bit of the tide, because I quite like the idea of having a look at what the tide dragged in.
Oh yeah. Let's look at what the tide dragged in this week, for sure, definitely. No, we'll over time we'll create like segments and stuff that we can name differently.
Yeah, and we have to keep those segments short. I know, for the I think the content consumption rate, it's if in 10 seconds it doesn't grab you, then oh, please don't stop this video. If you stayed with us, you're a champion. But we might break it down.
That's what we've been recording.
Yeah, we'll break it down.
We're going to be aiming for maximum 30-minute videos, and that's like at the top end of discussions. Explainer videos like probably far less than 10 minutes. And yeah, if we're interviewing people, that I don't think we necessarily put a cap on, but it's going to be like 30 minutes to an hour, depending on what we want to cover and how much detail we need to go into, because some things need to go into detail, because some, like, especially when you think about like mainstream media and like the interviews that they have over there that last like 2 minutes, and you can't really cover what needs to be covered for your understanding of a certain topic. Right. Especially with something that impacts you on a significant scale, but it's not given enough attention.
Yeah, so, and if it's something that really you want to talk about, we are open for anyone to come on, I think.
Yeah,
isn't it? Because we're supposed to, and we're trying to build an inclusive environment where you generally don't feel that there's a big divide between someone who is a senior scientist and someone who has just started out in high school. We should be able to have a conversation and be at the same level, because we are first and foremost, we are just people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a good place to end it. It's been 40 minutes. We've been thinking of a name for this long.
Yeah.
I think we brought it down to 2, although I'm pretty sold on wet and salty, to be honest.
Yeah, me too. But let's see what our focus group has to say, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, for sure. Then maybe we do like a second recording where we like, okay, now that we have the name, let's get a tagline. Let's maybe think of like names for segments, and so we'll get another second session 0, maybe 0.2 maybe. But I don't know, it's a fun chat.
Absolutely, and I think I'm going to look forward to every week having this chat with you, because it actually does help to contextualize, put things into focus. I think it will help us all to sort of work a little bit more cooperatively, and have at least a better idea. Oh, okay, there's other people out there also working, and it's people that we can approach.
Yeah, for sure. So if anyone wants to find out where they can get a hold of Argonaut Science and its work, where can they do that?
Well, probably the easiest way is on the internet. If you look for Argonaut Science on the internet, not astronaut science, because then you'll find different sort of things. Then you should be able to find us there. We are on Instagram as well, and we also you might bump into us if you are traveling along the coast somewhere in South Africa.
Definitely. Go check out Argonaut Science. And of course, you can find my stuff at geekoscopy.com. If you're an audio-only listener, I traced my finger across my cap because it's written on my cap. But if you're audio-only, it's geekoscopy, like microscopy.com. And you'll find all of my stuff there, or any social media /geekoscopy, unless it's like Yahoo or MSN. I ain't on those platforms because they're dead. But yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Cheers.